welcome to all of you here, and thank you for either being still here or coming to the talk from Kevin Mwachiro. He is a writer, podcaster, journalist, and queer activist. Additionally, he has been working as a media and communication professional for over 20 years, and he writes articles for various media platforms and cultural magazines. His first book is titled Invisible: Stories from Kenya's Queer Community. It was published in 2014, and the short story Nambasita is his most recent work and was released in 2021. His play, Trashed, is part of Six and the City, a project of the Goethe-Institut Kenya. Furthermore, Kevin Mwachiro was part of the editorial team of Boldly Queer. He co-founded the Out of Film Festival. He was jointly responsible for the implementation of the first LGBTQI film festival in East Africa, and we're very happy he's here with us today to talk about faith in Africa's youth. So please join me in welcoming Kevin Mwachiro.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for choosing to spend the next half an hour with me. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me here. And yeah, I'm passionate about Africa, I'm passionate about the youth, and I'm passionate about life. There aren't that many madmen left in Africa anymore. They've either been bought, muzzled, closeted themselves, disillusioned, decided to conform, or sadly have been killed. There aren't that many mad men in Africa anymore because the older men don't want to let go. 1960 was described as the year of Africa. During this year, 17 African countries gained independence. A number of the presidents of the recently birthed countries at that time were relatively young. Patrice Lumumba of the DRC and the country's prime minister was 35. Ahmed Sekou Toure of Guinea was 36. Kabaka Mutesa of Uganda was 38, and Milton Obote, his prime minister, was 37. Julius Nyerere was 39 when he became Tanzania's first president. Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia was 40. Modibo Keita of Mali was 45, and Kwame Nkrumah and Philibert Siramanana of Madagascar were 48. The 60s saw a wind of change sweep across the continent, and many of its newly found citizens had to entrust their futures and their destinies into the hands of young men who were playing at a new continental and global level. Thomas Sankara was not part of this crop of leaders. He was a revolutionary who came to power in a coup in 1983 and became the leader of Burkina Faso for 4 years. He was 38. He renamed his country Burkina Faso from Upper Volta, with Burkina Faso meaning the land of honest men. His foreign policies were anti-imperialist, and he rejected aid from the IMF, opting to look for other sources of assistance and attempted to boost domestic revenue. Domestically, under his presidency, 10 million trees were planted in 15 months to combat desertification. He promoted the use of vaccines, outlawed female genital mutilation, establishing feeding and housing schemes, and built over 700 kilometers of railways to help the country's industry. Plus, he's been described as a feminist for improving the status of Burkinabe women. He was no saint and came under criticism for suppressing press freedoms and how he dealt with corrupt individuals. To this day, his supporters admire his Pan-Africanist outlook, his egalitarianism, and he's often described as Africa's Che Guevara. However, though he was only in power for 4 years, he was ousted by the coup. You live by the gun, you die by the gun. But Sankara wanted to be described as a madman, and I quote, "You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from nonconformity, the courage to turn your back on old formulas, and the courage to invent the future. Besides, it took the madmen of yesterday for us to be able to act with extreme clarity today. I want to be one of those madmen, and we must dare to invent the future," says Sankara. My home, Africa, is described as the world's youngest continent, but it is the oldest men who run it. Paul Biya is 89 and has been Cameroon's president for 41 years. 79-year-old Yoweri Museveni of Uganda has been in power since 1986. Equatorial Guinea's President Theodore Obiang Nguema is the longest-serving president on the continent, and at 80, has been in power since 1979. He was elected for another 6 years last year. Close to 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. They have never lived without the internet, color TV, or MTV. They don't know how to work a cassette deck, and many of them don't even know what a video looks like, and have lived in an era of mobile telephony. In Kenya, the official age of the youth is between 18 and 35, yet globally the figure is between 18 and 24. I find this one way of muzzling the young population, as those in power keep saying the youth, as we call them, vijana, aren't ready for leadership roles because they lack the necessary experience. I consider that gatekeeping in leadership. You must ask, what experience did the founding fathers of the continent have back in the 60s when they were in their 30s in running their nations? Yesterday, you got to hear what trust sounds in Kiswahili, amani, during the opening remarks, amani. In 2006, I returned home from the UK where I'd been for 3.5 years studying and working. I'll be honest, I was not keen on returning to Kenya, but the country had just kicked out a dictator, and there was natural euphoria and hope. It was contagious. Come back home, come back home. Everything is working, things are finally getting done. These were phrases from family and friends. So I went back home. I trusted their words and believed their hope, and I had to trust Kenya with my dreams and recently acquired degree. Fast forward to 17 years later, and only a few of the young people I interact with have the same trust in Kenya that I had back then initially. I was going to give you a speech and dazzle you with facts and figures and terms like internet penetration, web penetration, and drop in ChatGPT, which I still don't fully understand, and other technical solutions on how technology will change the future if left in the hands of young people. But that wasn't going to be me, and it was going to feel a little bit forced. So I changed tact. And I'd like to tell you, thanks to the work that I do as a storyteller, I've gotten to gain the trust of young people. When I was a young adult, I volunteered as a youth worker at my local church. It was fun. Through song, dance, and drama, and just being ourselves, we as youth leaders mentored many kids in high school. I saw them morph from preteens to teenagers until they went to university. Working with young people made me feel alive. I felt that I could be real with them. They saw me, and I saw them, and there was no judgment there. Even now, through my podcast, writing, public speaking, and being openly public about my sexuality, I've discovered that the one demographic that sees me most and I have gotten most access to are the youth. I recently did 2 podcast interviews, one where I spoke about how my last relationship fell apart, and another about my journey as being an openly gay man in Kenya. I also wrote an article about how my faith and sexuality were at loggerheads during those years that I was involved in youth work. I have chosen to be authentic and vulnerable in my storytelling, which has helped me earn the trust of individuals who I don't even know. Random people come up to me and thank me for sharing my story. For example, on a recent flight I took recently from Nairobi to Mombasa, the capital, to the second city, the young lady that was seated next to me had just listened to the podcast about my relationship and told me how she empathized with the situation that I was in. And briefly, we lamented about men. My openness is not just about speaking about my sexuality, but my battle with cancer has given me access to individuals who feel that they can trust me with their stories and their journey. People, like we've heard before, are after empathy, not sympathy. I have an intern, his name is GT, and he's 24 years old. He was first introduced to me through a therapist friend because he wanted to know more about podcasting. At that time, he was also having struggles with his parents, having just come out to them. I think we spoke about podcasting twice, and our conversations quickly moved to navigating life as gay men in Kenya. He read everything about me, and I invited him to ask me anything. I discovered he has a fantastic sense of humor and is very curious. Thanks to him, I get a window into the world of TikTok. I know how Gen Zs consume digital media, and we share, I think, too many video reels on Instagram between one another. I get photos from him on his new hairstyles, his manicured nails, and long animated voice notes on his escapades through life. Recently, he wanted to know how my generation used to listen to music before iTunes and Spotify, and what existed before digital media. To GT, I am a safe place where he can be himself fully. He trusts me. And I've discovered that very few young people in my part of the world have access to adults whom they can trust. I too have learned a lot from GT. As I prepared for this speech, I asked some of my nephews, GT, and other Gen Zs with whom I interact with whether they trusted us being my generation, with guaranteeing the future of their country and the continent. Of course, some wholeheartedly trusted my contemporaries, recognizing the experience and sacrifice of the older generation. Still, I got nuanced responses that got me thinking and a little concerned. These are some of the responses that I received. I think you lot are geared towards bettering and fathering yourselves than helping develop our generation to better equip us for the future. Very few of you take up the effort to do what is necessary to secure our future and ensure we are prepared with the appropriate knowledge and skills to keep things running even after you've gone. Another response. Sometimes we get to learn a lot of things for ourselves because what was important to the older generation isn't helping us grow and not helping us expand outside of the societal box that we've been put in. Your generation are self-seeking and want to maintain the status quo rather than create a different future. So while the older generation may want us to have a good future, they lack some of the foresight to see that change is necessary. One was blatant, saying, "I don't trust your generation in securing the continent's future because some of you are still living like you want to please your parents. You're not looking to one another to exchange views, nor are you exposing yourself to different worldviews. Even if we'd like to make a difference on the continent, you guys have made it so difficult for us." And one last response. It is essential to give young people a voice and involve them in decision-making, and involve them in the decision-making process. Then, if you can learn from each other and value each other's perspectives, we are en route to building the best future for our continent. A sense of regression and stagnation is felt amongst the youth. But unfortunately, recent events across the continent don't help either. The recent fighting in Sudan, the election of another 70-plus-year-old leader in Nigeria, the shutting down of the internet during general elections, the high cost of data, the enactment of laws that criminalize LGBTQ individuals, the hesitancy to address what are seen as taboo subjects like abortion, suicide, legislation of sex work, or marijuana, and attitudes towards poor mental health are seen as hindrances. And we still have corruption and poor governance that is our Achilles heel. Young people are constantly sussing us out as adults. They want to see whether our actions match our words. And with all that is happening around us, they believe we are responsible for the current upheaval and are turning to each other for advice and safety. They trust each other more and find community in a borderless and virtual world. If a young Kenyan non-binary person can't find a physical community in Kenya, they will find it virtually. However, the real world exists. And sadly, for many young Africans, what they see online doesn't remotely come close to their very existence. Promises from politicians are often empty, and a tweet could land you in prison. There's irregular electricity, epic traffic jams, misogyny, limited access to financing, or the pressure to meet societal and familial obligations, sometimes called black tax. Yet, they know that another world is possible for themselves and for the continent. Still, they have to overcome the gatekeepers. Their trust in the systems or systems have been severely eroded, and the playing field has become more uneven. GT sadly doesn't see a future for himself in Kenya or Africa because he doesn't see substantial change around that offers him security and promise. He doesn't dream of Africa like I do. The internet has shown him and many of his generation a world much wider than the one I grew up in. For him, geographical location, money, and visa restrictions are the main hindrances to him reaching his full potential. I recognize that GT doesn't represent the youth on the whole continent, but I'm listening to him and the likes of him a lot more. And I've learned that with non-judgmental listening and seeing him, I've gained his trust and his ears. We need to be vulnerable and authentic with each other for trust to exist. By laying myself bare through my work, I have gained the confidence of young people like GT who are unafraid to share their truth and struggles with me. Africa's youth wants to be seen as part of the solutions to the problems that their continent is facing because they know they will bear the brunt of our mistakes and our missed opportunities. So we need to ensure that they are in the room. They want to be mentored. They want to learn. They want to be heard and want to feel valued. We can only discuss the continent's future if we are inclusive of its future. In the words of the Kenyan Nobel laureate and environmentalist, the late Professor Wangari Maathai, those of us who have been privileged to receive education, skills, and experience, and even power must be role models for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin Mwachiro. I have to have a look at the time. Maybe we can take one question from the audience. If there is any, let me know. Then we could engage you with Kevin. No? Yes, there is one question. Here we go. Is there a microphone? Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a wonderful speech. You referred back to the era of Pan-Africanism and the inspiration of those leaders. How does Pan-Africanism play out for youth now? Is that a space that you see youth inspired by? Where does that play a role for them as they look at their role on the continent?
That's a great question. I think Pan-Africanism is showing itself through song, through arts and culture. We are seeing people watching Nollywood movies right across the continent. You know, we're seeing programs like The Real Housewives of Lagos, The Real Housewives of Nairobi. We're seeing people consume content that is created by Africans for Africans. We're seeing people dancing to Amapiano in Kenya or West Africa. We're seeing people consuming media. We're seeing young people beginning to travel across the continent, be it by plane or by bus. They're beginning to take hold of their continent and understand who they are, thanks to the internet. And for me, that is that new form of Pan-Africanism, one not based on ideology, but one based on the culture that is thriving and that is constantly changing in Africa. They don't care for the politics. They just want to be seen. They just want to be represented and they want their stories told.